Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monty Sylvan, and I'm the coordinator for the membership department here at AVMed. Today, we have an insightful discussion in partnership with EPAM, DeepSight Technology, as well as Philips, entitled AI-enabled MedTech and the Future of Diagnostics. We're just going to get right into it. I'm going to kick us off by introducing our speakers today. To start off, we have Anastasia Christensen, Managing Principal, Business Consulting and Clinical Informatics at EPAM Systems. We have Alyssa Abo, VP of Clinical Innovation at DeepSight Technology, as well as Wilson Toe, VP of Global Strategy and BD, Healthcare Informatics at Philips. I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves. Anastasia, can you kick it off, please?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Monty, and thank you to the AVMed and EPAM organizers for including me in this conversation. And thank you to my colleagues here who are joining this interesting conversation. As you said, Anastasia Christensen, I'm a life science consultant at EPAM after spending almost 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry. 4 major pharma companies. Most recently, I was the head of AI, data, and analytics at Pfizer. And before that, I was leading digital transformation, clinical development in therapeutic areas, and digital health and innovation at J&J. I'm a scientist by training and always worked at the interface between science, technology, and data analytics. I'm very passionate about data-driven decisions and advocating for the value of predictive analytics and AI to develop better prognostic and diagnostic tools. And this is well before ChatGPT made this trendy. So, so definitely a lot of passion around using data to make better decisions, developing diagnostic tools, and using technology to improve our way of living. Over to you, Alyssa.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Anastasia. And like Anastasia said, thank you to AVMed and EPAM for having us. I'm really delighted to be here today. I'm Alyssa Abo, and I am a health tech nerd. I have been a health tech nerd ever since I was a little kid, so this is nothing new. I am a pediatric emergency physician and also have a background in engineering and business. So similar to Anastasia, spent 20 plus years. And for me, it was really at the intersection of academics and industry and trying to figure out creative ways to bring more technology into clinical medicine. Over the last few years, I started working more closely with startups, either as an executive, board director, and most recently, investor. Over the past, I would say, year or so, as the digital health, arena is really starting to explode with medical devices, I found myself really enjoying being at the intersection of devices and digital health technology. So I'm delighted that we'll be speaking about that today. Currently, I'm the VP of Clinical Innovation at DeepSight Technology and also serve as an advisor on real-world evidence for Impact One at Stanford Biodesign. So with that, I will kick it off to you, Wilson.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Just by way of introduction, my name is Wilson Toe. I'm the Vice President of Global Strategy and Business Development for Philips, and specifically its Healthcare Informatics Division and Business. If you think about Philips and the intersection point of industries that it's created, it's a rich legacy of over 133 years of innovation. And it's ranged from everything from lighting all the way through to today in medical devices and healthcare technology and informatics. And so here at Philips, I lead strategy and the focus areas specifically around everything from PACS systems to EMR systems to device integration systems and things of that sort. At the end of the day, as we think about the intersection of technology as well as healthcare, there's quite a lot that goes on in terms of what we're doing to modernize, to really drive innovation. And at the end of the day, the work that I do is helping foster that across the division. I've been with Philips for about 3 years now. My background is kind of in the big tech going into the healthcare life sciences space. Similar to my colleagues here, I'm a big data geek in that right as well. And so looking forward to a very, very thought-provoking conversation with the team here.
Fantastic. I believe each of you bring a very unique expertise to this conversation, so I'm excited to get into it. So let's get started with our topic, shall we? AI is reshaping the life science and healthcare landscape. What's your high-level view of its transformative impact on diagnostics and patient care? And what are the biggest opportunities for integration? Anastasia, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I can kick us off here. So yes, no doubt AI is having a transformative impact. in how diseases are detected, how diseases are managed and treated, with perhaps detection being the most transformative impact, I think. AI algorithms excel at analyzing complex data, right? Analyzing medical images, X-rays, MRIs, CT scans, finding subtle patterns or anomalies faster, and I would dare to say more accurately than a human eye can, or even a trained physician or expert. This can lead to earlier detection of disease, right? And if you have earlier detection of disease, you have better outcomes for the patient. So it's probably the most important. If I use an example like lung cancer through CT scans, you can detect tiny little nodules faster, earlier now. Heart failure is another one that I think is a lot of people are looking at. You can look at through echocardiograms and the analysis of echocardiograms, you can identify potentially any factors that affect the heart, including obviously multiple that are that cause heart failure. It enhances decision making and workflows, and just the way that physicians can interact. It does not replace physicians. It does not replace the experts, but it does augment and facilitate getting faster to a decision, seeing some things that they might otherwise not have paid as much attention to, and having them look at it in a little more detail. Maybe I'll pause there and pass it over to Wilson just to switch it up a little bit.
Perfect.
Sure, absolutely. The trends that we see across our customer base, and these range from health systems and hospitals all around the world, is, a graduation from where we've seen the industry go from, let's digitalize everything, go from paper to bits and bytes. And we've seen that then shift over to how do we make everything interoperable, right? All the data silos that existed when we digitized everything is now shifting towards a broader sense of how do I make sense of that data? And with all the advances in AI and generative AI that we've seen over the past, 2 years, 3 years, and even past 5 years, we're actually starting to see how not just data is being encoded into hard drives, but really intelligence. And what that's allowed clinicians to do is actually spend more time in different areas where, it's not just about searching for information anymore. It's really about surfacing insights. And so what we see from our customers day to day is really anchored around three areas where they see that type of benefit from a usability perspective, or even just from an opportunity perspective. One is around just the sheer signal. I just want to automate all the invisible work that I do. And that has been like clear signal number one. And when you think about what that means, then it actually allows them to shift more attention to the opportunities and the tasks that they want to focus on. And in that capacity, that's where we see actually a large shift in the data, actually augmenting clinical workflows more and more. So of what is in front of me, how do I then do my task or my set of responsibilities better, faster, more effectively, and really rethink about what that means. And we're starting to see actually an emergence of what the automation and augmentation is starting to drive in terms of workflows in general across the hospitals. And that's really around re-architecting workflows now. So it's not just about bolting on like risk models and risk scores and things like that to existing workflows that have been created over the past 20 years, but what if we redesigned everything with an AI first, AI native mindset? Everything actually changes. And so the opportunities are starting to emerge from those types of conversations where the focus and attention of clinicians are becoming front and center for how the AI opportunity is really changing the landscape. Melissa, I mean, as a clinician yourself, like, how do you see it?
So I love this question, and I'll start with what I was going to end with, which was what you were talking about, the shift. And
Yeah.
so much in technology, I think people are worried about taking away from the interaction between the patient and the provider. And throughout this webinar, I'll talk as a physician on behalf of physicians. That's what I'm most comfortable doing. But certainly, this pertains to everyone in healthcare: physicians, nurses, techs, pharmacists. I think we all have a role to play with the adoption of technology. But getting to your point, some of these technologies can actually bring back some of that human element. I often hear, oh, my physician was stuck behind the computer. Well, if you have a scribe that's listening and using AI to essentially generate the note, it takes some of that burden off of the provider in the moment and actually allows them to get back to the interaction. And to me, that's the art of medicine. The heart of medicine is really based on that interaction. So, what I was originally planning to start with, when Monty asked this question, high level view, I think both of your answers were so spot on. And for me, they fit under this architecture of like, okay, there's all of these amazing technologies out there across the board, devices, data, life science, med tech. But so what? Like, what do we do with all of this? And I think more and more I try to really think about like, what is the North Star? And DeepSight, I think, is a company that's really focused on this, like the technologies that we're developing. So what is the end result? And I like to bring it back to the quintuple aim. It started off as a triple aim, then quadruple, and then quintuple. And so just to remind everyone, the five of the quintuple aim are one, patient experience. And I think for a lot of technologies, that's really front and center. People are thinking about the patient, and as a physician, nothing makes me happier that we're really focused on how to deliver better patient care at the end of the day. Two is really improving population health. And this is where I think it starts to like really up the ante. Okay, so it's not just about that one individual. It's really about all of us globally and how we can then leverage that experience. Three, reducing costs. So, that's not a focus of the conversation today, but let's just leave it at that's always better if it can still be effective and efficient. And then the last two that were more recently added on were improving provider well-being, which like you wouldn't always think about it. And as a physician, I don't think we often would think about like, well, what's better for us? But at the end of the day, some of the technologies you're both alluding to, I think if they can decrease the burden on the provider and get them back to why they signed up to be in medicine in the first place, that's really important. And then the fifth one is advancing health equity. And I think that really is just the tip of all of this and saying, okay, it's not just better for the individual or this community. It's really how do we advance healthcare in a way that's good for all of us. And I think that's what excites me the most. And so to me, that is the biggest opportunity is developing these technologies that can really not only address one of those, but really try to address all five.
Yes, and if I may, right, jump in just to switch it up a little bit. The point of operational efficiencies, if you would call it that, right, helping the physician or any healthcare worker actually work more effectively, get not spend so much time behind the computer. The benefit of doing that, while it may seem a small change, it enables them to think more about personalized treatments and to think more about the patient. It gives them back the time to focus on the patient instead of the notes they need to write or the codes that they need to come up with for how do I code this and so on. AI enables them to actually focus on the five components that you mentioned, right? Actually, yeah, focusing on the patient, focusing on the outcome, and focusing on reducing the workload for themselves and for their colleagues.
Absolutely. Extremely well said, everyone. I'd like to shift our focus to AI and diagnostics and precision medicine. So I'd like to ask, AI is enabling earlier detection and more accurate diagnosis of diseases. What are some specific examples or breakthroughs that stand out to you?
I'm happy to kick it off.
Okay,
So I was
Melissa.
recently invited to write a few chapters in an AI textbook, really a practical guide for clinicians. And so I was looking at it yesterday thinking, okay, what could I share in this webinar? And one of the cases that we highlighted in the book was a 3-day-old who came to the hospital with seizures. And using AI, and you're talking about diagnostics, they were able to look at the EMR data so that, shout out to my friend Wilson. They were able to look at the genomic data and then the blood data, and then come to a diagnosis within 24 hours that then feeds directly into the treatment plan of that neonate. And subsequently, the article also talked about how the diagnosis, how we would do it conventionally, took another 27 hours, so another day. And that might not seem like a lot, but when you're only 3 days old, actually every minute matters. And so to me, it's using AI in a way that can bring data out of its silos, make it actionable, and actually allow us as clinicians to act on it to really provide better patient care.
I think you're spot on with that. And, I think that there's an element of it where, um, as you think about the hospital and the clinicians' kind of workflows, every element of the value chain really is meant to be an opportunity to change things now. So whether it's downstream where clinicians are looking at the data, trying to assess what's going on, trying to make a diagnosis, or even upstream, I think, in another example where we see customers more and more just want to use the devices that they have, for example, and shift from here's a device that's kind of standalone to one that's connected, to one that's smart, to one that's intelligent now. How does that actually change how the entire chain of events that happens to diagnose that patient, whether it's a 3-day-old to a 30-year-old, really helps shift the experience as well as the focus of the data journey across this. So one example that I see across many of our customers, like Leiden University Medical Center or even at Mass General Brigham's, is the deployment of new solutions where these smart devices, these intelligent devices, have models deployed to them, such as like our MR smart speed technologies, where it actually shifts how the patients, while they're still at the site getting an image or a scan, is actually shifting how their experiences in the actual image creation aspect of it, rather than just the downstream of it. And so even what we're seeing in the pilots there is like a 3x improvement in image sharpness, for example. And even just downstream from that, as you think about all the different types of, oh, I need to shift a little bit here, take another image, shift another bit there, take another image. How do we reduce the need to retake all those images and actually improve the entire patient experience that way? And ultimately, what that comes down to is less scans, improve reporting times, but also how patients at the end of the day experience the entire health system overall. So I think there's opportunities across the board, I think, to your point, not just the downstream, but also this upstream where we see a lot of those opportunities.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
really love that. And sorry if I could just, respond to that for a second. It's so interesting that you focus on workflow. So I haven't spoken about DeepSight and what we do, but DeepSight has essentially figured out a way to revolutionize ultrasound with sensor technology. And so we're developing a sensor that can go into instruments and make the instruments smarter. And so if
Mhm.
there's a sensor in an instrument that's literally smaller than a hair follicle and it's an acoustic sensor, it can listen for sound. So because of that, the idea and the goal is that like we can actually with accuracy see where your instrument is, whether it's a needle, it's a wire, whatever it might be. And then to me, both of them know that medical imaging is really near and dear to my heart. So the fact that both of you have used so many imaging examples like makes me so happy. This sensor can actually listen for sound and generate an image from the vantage point of the instrument. So now you're taking an instrument, making it smart, and then thinking about how that translates to the workflow. And that's a really big part of it for us is, okay, so if we change any part of the instrument, what does it mean for the workflow? But then the bigger picture is if you can get to where you're going faster, better, more efficiently, the patient has less anesthesia time. If they can use ultrasound over CT in a certain instance, it's less radiation. So I love this conversation because I think you can say, oh, here's one technology, but then the implications downstream and upstream really have the ability to start to change the landscape of how we do things.
Yeah, and getting there faster, right? You mentioned the newborn, 3 days in, 3 minutes will make a big difference, actually, for example. But I was thinking of the example of sepsis. So sepsis is when your body pretty much shuts down, and the faster you get to it and you give the right antibiotic, the more likely you might be able to reverse the process. And Duke University, I think there might be another place that has a sepsis watch system that uses AI to analyze electronic health records for patients that might be at risk. And they can detect patients who might be at risk for sepsis 36 hours before any clinical symptoms appear. Like then you have time to react and stop sepsis from progressing or stop it from starting. So elements like this, it's not about replacing what people do or a better way to do the same thing. It's actually doing something that you really aren't able to do in any other way. That 36-hour advance warning on sepsis is huge in terms of being able to save a young child or save an elderly person that's susceptible.
And just to add to that, from the clinical perspective, my world is pediatric, and sometimes it's really hard to tell if a child is in early sepsis.
Mhm.
And I remember early on, we were developing some trigger algorithm, some warning mechanism, and then you would get a call from triage. Can you come look at this patient? They triggered the sepsis alert, but they don't look septic. And then we would take them off. But the whole idea was we're sometimes not that good at being able to look at someone and tell. And then we would have instituted a system, and then we were still going back and, trying to,
Mhm.
in a subjective way, really determine whether or not we thought a patient was at risk. So to have come from there and then watch the evolution of what you're describing, of really using the intelligence part of that and starting to take less of it off of like, well, I don't think they look bad, I think really will have big implications.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. And with those responses, it begs the question, what challenges do we still face in deploying AI to scale precision medicine, particularly in diverse patient populations? Uh, I'll leave it open to everyone, but Wilson, if you want to lead us off, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I talk to regulatory bodies, when I talk to customers, when I talk to our partners, the one thing that stands out as we think about precision medicine and population health is whether or not data in and of itself, as it's collected, is really truly reflective of the patient population that communities serve today. So, for example, in a recent Philips Health Index study, 87% of healthcare leaders worry that skewed data sets will actually be hard-coded bias in existing systems today just as a result of the data that's been aggregated and collected over the past 10, 20 years. And with that comes the potential of widening some of these existing gaps. And so curating these inclusive data sets is actually every bit as important as it is to create these algorithms that represent them. And that has been front and center for how as we innovate and as we go from even training all the way to deployment and using these models, it becomes something that we have to keep in mind as we think about how we work with our customers, how we work with hospitals to really invent on their behalf, but also invent with them in order to make sure that they're serving the right populations. And in that sort of sense, be inclusive as well as representative of that population itself.
Yeah, if I may add to that. So there's, in my mind, three components, right? There's the data bias, there's the patient availability bias. Of course, there's quality, but that goes along with data. And then there's algorithmic bias, right? So the data bias, part of it is lack of diversity, right? All models will underperform in underrepresented groups. It's just fact, right? That's just, you don't give it the data, it doesn't know how to respond to it. And there's historical inequities. Yes, we're moving in the right direction, but it wasn't until 1990 that women first started getting included in clinical trials. 1993 was a turning point. So think about it. That was only like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I mean, it was within at least my lifetime that happened. And before that, there were regulations that excluded women from clinical trials. Okay, with good reasons at the time, because they were worried, about women in childbearing age and so on. But it was just, complete ban as opposed to having criteria depending on the drug and so on. So, do we have as much data on women's health? We don't. We're collecting it now. When you're looking at building models that use historical data, you're going to be missing that. And I'm just using one example of women's health because I'm more familiar with that, but you've got other populations that are also excluded. So we have a responsibility as technologists, AI leaders, and so on to make sure that we identify when the data are biased and that we do something about it and that we look at algorithms and make sure that we don't have bias in the algorithms as well. So I think we are absolutely moving in a really good direction. There's lots of guidance documents. There's lots of tools that now will review AI tools to make sure that there's no bias or to flag up if there's bias, whether it be in the data or the algorithm. And we need to do more of that.
Wonderful. So with the discussion of these challenges, I think it would be good for us to start discussing AI's impact on patient care and trust. So I was wondering, in what ways has AI enhanced patient outcomes and care accessibility, and how do you expect these benefits to evolve over the next 5 years? Alyssa, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So I think AI is all the rage, right? It's certainly a buzzword. And I think as a patient, as a provider, we're seeing AI everywhere. I think one of the biggest challenges that remains is adoption and trust. I think there is still, in some ways, a healthy skepticism around it and really trying to understand the value that it brings. In chat GPT, there was an article, not too long ago in a pediatrics hospital that was looking at chat GPT and diagnosing pediatric conditions. And it won't surprise you that over 80% of the diagnoses were wrong, right? So I think there is this notion that chat GPT and things of the like are going to be people's go-to. And I think that is in a sense true. But, it's hard if you're the patient how to know what to trust and what to believe. I think AI technologies coming in through the healthcare system and the hospital system have a different vetting process. And I think there is still that adoption curve in getting people within the healthcare system to trust those technologies. But I'm more optimistic that if the providers, the physicians trust the technologies you're using, because there's some transparency and they understand where the technologies are coming from, the algorithms, the data, things like that. If they can share that with their patient population, then we can really leverage that relationship, leverage the bond, and then I think they'll bring more value to the patient than sending patients on their own to just sort of, figure it out. I think that that could potentially be a recipe for disaster. So I think the future is really bright and I think it's really exciting. And we're already starting to see some of it translate. But if I had to say one thing that I think remains to be the challenge, it would certainly be around trust and adoption.
Fantastic. Uh, and I think that is a good transition into the idea of explainable AI. So I was wondering, what's the role of explainable AI in creating transparency around AI-driven decision making in patient care? Anastasia, could you take this one for us?
Absolutely. I'll kick it off and then please feel free to add, Alyssa and Wilson. So
Absolutely.
just for the audience to make sure the audience is mixed, I'm sure explainable AI is basically a set of techniques and processes that make decision making of artificial intelligence systems more transparent, right? More understandable, more interpretable by humans. So it takes the black box out of AI. So using explainable AI will raise people's understanding of AI and by default then the trust in AI because they can understand how and why a tool that uses AI is arriving at the recommendation that it's arriving at, or at the decision, or at the diagnosis, or whatever that it's coming at. So that will help not only the end user, as in the physician or the healthcare provider, it will also help the patient because a physician will be able to explain as they normally do explain. If they make a diagnosis, they'll explain why they made the diagnosis. If an AI made a diagnosis, they may or may not, if the AI is not explainable. So it just makes the users much more comfortable. And we do need to build trust, as has been mentioned already. We need to make sure that patient safety remains of utmost importance, and understanding what AI is doing and how it's diagnosing something, and or what recommendations it is giving, especially as people might start using agentic AI on their own, actually, to ask questions and so on. So having that regulatory compliance, improve patient safety, front and center is essential. And there are a number of guidelines that are out there that can be used from a user perspective, from a developer perspective, from a large organization that uses AI perspective, right? There are guidelines like the National Academy of Medicine, for example, put guidelines out very recently. There's FDA guidelines, there's many other guidelines. So I think we need to use that. And back to explainable AI, we need to focus on the use of explainable AI to make sure that we raise trust. Wilson or Alyssa, you want to add anything more to this?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that, actually. What I hear from our customers all the time is that transparency isn't just a nice to have anymore. It really is a currency for adoption. When we talk to customers as they're assessing and or implementing AI solutions, We've seen it noticeably different when there is explainability and or transparency built into how a model is augmenting a clinician. Because at the end of the day, AI is just an ally for a clinician. It is never the authority. And so as you think about what that means, it's always trying to help, it's creating the methodologies and framework for which the clinicians are always in the loop, and informing and augmenting capabilities helps drive that type of focus. And I think more importantly, it really is around bridging that trust gap that you had mentioned. And it's a constant theme that we've had in our discussion so far, because it is so front and center for how customers are assessing, evaluating, and implementing these.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And to piggyback off of what you have been saying, Wilson, I think it is important that we discuss implementation and the industry challenges in regards to AI. Adoption of AI is still met with hurdles, from data silos to resistance from stakeholders. What strategies have proven effective in overcoming these operational barriers?
I'm happy to kick it off. So, one of the first startups I worked for in-house was a real-world data startup. And we were really focused on how to start to break down the data silos. And because early on my area of focus was point of care ultrasound, which, probably makes Wilson happy, I was really intrigued by, okay, we have so much data, EMR data, ultrasound data, but it's really hard to connect the ultrasound data to the EMR data in the point of care world at the time. Certainly the infrastructure and the more traditional ultrasound specialties like radiology and cardiology did not have maybe these same challenges, but it was still really challenging to look at the data in one place. So the startup I was working for was creating trusted data environments to start to bring down the silos and really figure out ways for people to collaborate. And I really do like the trusted data environment model. In that model, organizations, hospitals can put data into that environment, but they're controlling what data goes in. They have security measures, governance measures, but it's really a way to create a federated model where multiple organizations can put in different data from different data sources and then share that data in a way that they can do research together from the academic standpoint, or share that data outwardly with industry to really develop new technologies, but all the meanwhile ensure that the real world data has the proper controls around it, that it's de-identified, potentially also anonymized. Can it be tokenized in a way that more data coming in can be linked down the road? But I think when we think about data and data strategy and how to really start to bring the data together, those sort of models, federated models, putting data in trusted data environments is something that I think can start to really break down the silos. So with that, I'd be really curious. I see Wilson nodding his head, but I'd be curious, what your thoughts are there.
No, I think that's spot on. When I think about the type of stakeholder engagement that really drives success with AI adoption, it really has, platform or technology is one aspect of it, and that's always coupled with, the types of people and process that comes with it as well. And what we've found, whether here at Philips or even with health systems, is that baseline knowledge and understanding of what AI is, and more importantly, like what is it not? Because I think there's so much hype and so much buzz around the terms and definitions around this topic, that it grounding it in reality and really starting with some of those fundamentals of what AI is, and some of the emerging technologies that literally can change every other day lately, is really crucial for how we see the cultural shift, not just in the technology adoption, but in the mindset shift that occurs with clinicians or even with builders. What if you had access to infinite compute and infinite storage? How do things change? And if you apply that type of understanding and knowledge into how we're creating workflows for clinicians, for example, and processing data, or helping set up to make a diagnosis, all of these come front and center in that kind of type of mindset shift that occurs. And I think what happens when you apply that into what customers are challenged with it on a day-to-day basis, and work backwards from a customer, you really start identifying and isolating those type of use cases that are kind of low-hanging fruit to some degree. It could be operational by nature, administrative by nature, but those are the things that help folks understand, wow, this is a thing that can not only hit my bottom line, but also from the quintuple aim that you had mentioned, it actually there's quite a bit of use cases that apply to every single one of those aims. And that's when the wheels start turning and the light bulbs start lighting up. And that's a cultural kind of transformation that occurs, but also one where the adoption across the industry is starting to take shape.
Agreed, spot on both what you said. So not to repeat anything, I'll just add to say training and education, right? So people need to see examples of where it's working and how it's working and why it's working. So anything that can be publicized, published, whatever, on examples that work, even if it's in other industries. So I've recently looked into this actually. There are success stories of AI in other industries that have been there before ChatGPT became popular. So we can take those, like, no plane can fly until it's actually thoroughly tested using AI, right? Before any passengers go in, before a pilot goes in. So there are other examples. That's maybe the extreme. There are other examples actually where AI has been used for many years very effectively, and we need to learn from those and surface those and train, educate, and then focus on change management in addition to breaking down the data silos. And some of the education is about breaking the data silos, like why it's important to break the data silos and the difference between if you have data silos and if you don't have data silos.
Absolutely. Very well said by all of you. And honestly, with the implementation of AI, it does bring a lot of concern about data security. So with data security and privacy are critical in healthcare innovation. How can medtech companies ensure AI-driven devices comply with global regulatory standards while building trust among patients and providers? Uh, Wilson, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to our deep roots across I think the panelists here, geeking out about these problems to make sure that they work across the board is front and center for this. So whether it's with healthcare providers, whether it's regulators, both have to all stakeholders come to the table to figure out, how do we make this thing a reality? And I think more so than anything, how do we make sure that it's secure from day one and secure by design? A recent example that we have at Philips is we work very closely with the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency over in the UK with their AI airlock program. Philips is one of five organizations that are working very closely to understand what is that environment by which we're able to do not only the testing of that, but more broadly the adoption of that as well. And the first question at the end of the day is, how is security, how is compliance, how's work? All of those are job zero for all of us, because that sets the tone and bar for what trust is, as well as a shared responsibility model across not only our organization, but the healthcare systems, but also all of our partners as well. So whether it's running things in the cloud where, the security of the cloud versus security in the cloud are vastly different things. And then the notion of extending that into healthcare environments is yet another plane that we have to solve for. And so across all of these layers, if you think about security as front and center for what we need to do in order to protect patient data and privacy, it actually drives a lot of the decisions, conversations, as well as the frameworks by which the broader industry is able to apply these. And so that's, how the conversation gets started. And, it's still early days, but we've made remarkable progress across each of these different topics.
Yeah, the only thing that then I would add is, and I was going to use the example that you used with the UK, but there are so many guidance documents. So I think early and ongoing compliance integration, that's probably the most important thing that we can do. Ongoing, start early, continue with it, make sure, because regulations change and evolve, right? Especially in this space. The space is changing and evolving. So regulations are changing and evolving. We have to keep up with them, right? And stay on top of them, because I use a quote. I actually don't remember who said it, but it's not my quote. But trust isn't a nice to have in healthcare, right? It's non-negotiable. So we got to have that, and the best way to have that is to have a very strong partnership with compliance and regulatory teams.
I would say in the pediatric space, folks are even more concerned about these issues for pediatric data. And I think rightfully so. The flip side of that is if we can access pediatric data, then we could potentially help kids live healthier lives, right? So it's not lost on me that some of the challenge in data access is for good reason, but how can we actually overcome those challenges? And so to the extent that there can be some infrastructure in place, bringing together the different data sources that's then managed and governed by the institutions, at least, if we're talking about on the hospital side, then I think it's a starting point because to Anastasia's, earlier comment on the regulatory aspects and some things keep changing. If you're trying to reinvent the wheel every time, that's a lot of work. So if there's a way to set up some infrastructure and as regulations change, maybe you can tweak, things are a bit more nuanced, then it might be more of a long-term strategy, if you will. And then the last part that I was going to share was just around data access. Some of the privacy concerns are around who's accessing the data and making sure that there's governance there, that the data being accessed, you're monitoring that. You know who's accessing the data. You know that they're accessing the data in the way that's intended for research, for collaboration. And I think having some guardrails there can also build the confidence around the security and privacy aspects of the data.
Absolutely. Well said, everyone. Anastasia mentioned earlier about being privy and aware of new technologies that are coming about. So I'd like to pivot real quick into just advancements in medical technology. So beyond diagnosis, AI has applications in care planning, drug delivery, long-term monitoring, and medication adherence. What are some devices or process trends emerging in this space currently? Uh, Alyssa, you
There
have
are
the
so
background.
many. I thought you were going to originally ask, like, how do we keep up with all of these changes? I was going to say LinkedIn. I'm just watching everybody all the time and the things that they're building.
That is
I
good to
think
commentate on, though.
Yeah, I think the home health market is the one to watch
Mhm.
to this question, at least the wearables, bringing better healthcare into the home, letting people stay in the environment that more often than not is where they want to be,
Mhm.
understanding that not everything will be able to translate there, but certainly more than there is now. I recently heard about AirPods or something of the effect, this is not a plug for Apple, but being able to help with like seizure detection and or the commercial where they function as hearing aids. And I watch these technologies and they start to feel more accessible. Growing up watching the Jetsons and things like that, every time I talk into my Apple Watch, I'm like, I never thought that I would be doing this in my lifetime.
Right.
So I think what's exciting in the space that you're describing is the wearables, the devices, things that you can use at home, and hopefully the data generated from that will be using AI or something intelligent that then can translate to the person and back to the people taking care of them so that we don't have more data because we don't just need more data for data's sake. That would just be data overload. So it has to be smart. But with that, that to me is a very exciting space.
I think what you're saying is we should watch LinkedIn and also watch Hollywood and cartoons.
There you go, right? I mean, it's a little bit of everything.
Yeah. For me, I think agents are something to watch, and we need to be careful. Like, I think patients will be using agents to help them go to their physicians with better questions, more informed questions, to be more informed about their disease. And that's not a bad thing. Being your advocate or having someone that's close to you be your advocate is not a bad thing, as long as there's the recognition that you may not have entered all the information, all the relevant information into whatever application you have or whatever agent you have. It may not have sucked all the information from, if you gave it access to your electronic health record, to maybe other information. So I think that's a space to watch in order for us to make sure that it's being used appropriately. And of course, I second what you said. The nanotechnology, new devices. We got to keep an eye on. There's always something new coming up. Smart adaptive devices, actually, that we need to both monitor, but also be creative and identify them and identify opportunities and work with relevant experts to develop them. Wilson, you do this every day, so
I'm
so what do you
trying.
add to that?
No, I think you're both are building on the same trends that I see in the industry. On one hand, Alyssa, to your point, as health and care is extending beyond the walls of the hospital, we see that being applied quite extensively into the home, where remote patient monitoring is starting to emerge as a viable way in which care can be achieved. but that also extends actually outside of the home and actually into areas that don't have access to, care and or remote areas where they just don't have clinicians day in, day out. And so that concept of how do you drive access to care, going to the earlier topic that we had, is actually one that's achievable through the means of how we see AI being deployed. And I say that because when I see tools like the Lumify ultrasound devices, for example, the very fact that you can have an AI guided scan drive the entire process instead of a 6-month long course of how to use the device, it actually brings maternal imaging to remote clinics. And that's powerful. And when we couple that with how we start seeing trends in kind of what we saw 10 years ago in patient and clinician engagement, that's actually evolving to a broader theme around patient and clinician empowerment now, where the LLMs that are powering a lot of these new AI services and tools and models are now taking personalization to a whole new level, right? And that actually drives, I think, Anastasia, to your point, you actually have an ally next to you who's advocating for you, who's trying to process and make things understandable for you. That changes the equation. That brings the patient directly into their own care team, right? And that's powerful. And more holistically, what we're seeing across the board is, I think, an emergence of how clinicians at the end of the day are interacting with data. And what I mean by that is we're so used to presenting charts and or text, and we're starting to see clinicians starting to interact with pixels now, for example, or interact with waveform data, because the way that we're driving the user interface or the user experience goes beyond a mouse and a keyboard now. And that changes the equations for how clinicians are able to operate. And these are driving a whole new different types of innovations across the board that we're seeing in the industry. And it is front and center for the quintuple aim that you had mentioned earlier.
And personalized patient care plans, right? I mean, it's fantastic. And being able to do that for patients who have special needs or for the elderly. I'll just bring a tiny little bit of personal experience. When I was caring for my 95-year-old mother, I could monitor all kinds of things at home. I could monitor them at home, not just her sugar levels, but also blood thinness, her heart failure components, all those things I could monitor at home. And it helped her stay out of the hospital a number of times, actually, when we were kind of at the verge of, okay, something's not right here. What do I need to measure? And then a phone call away, right? And you know what you need to do. It's there's just no substitute for that. And it's amazing because people with heart failure, as an example, didn't live very long in the past, but she lived with heart failure for like 7 or 10 years, actually, because we were able to monitor a whole bunch of parameters at home on a daily or weekly basis, depending on what was needed.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Well said. We're getting low on time, so I do want to get into these last two questions. We were just discussing the advancements in MedTech, so I just want to go through the broader future impact of AI in MedTech. So, what collaborations between manufacturers, healthcare providers, and regulatory bodies are crucial for scaling AI in life sciences? Anastasia, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to say similar to what I said before, early and integrated partnership. All right. So between manufacturers, healthcare providers, patients, users, if they don't fall in one of these three categories, I think the early engagement to actually get the different perspectives so that you're not backtracking. It used to be that, someone gets an idea and they go up to the mountain or go through the ivory tower or whatever, and they develop something and then they come back and want to test it. That's just not going to work anymore because the technology changes so fast and for a number of other reasons. So I think the partnership is critical. So you need to have the right people at the table helping to design. You need the patients helping to design. You need the healthcare providers helping to design. You need, of course, the developers and the architects and all of that, and the manufacturers. So for me, I'll just stop there and maybe pass it on to someone else because I know we're running low on time. But that's the most important, and including early and proactive communication with the regulatory bodies, which I mentioned before. Someone want to pick up on this?
I couldn't agree more. Nothing to repeat there. I mean, you're spot on. I would almost kick it back over to you, Monty, and say that AdvaMed does a great job of aligning those stakeholders and bringing people together and really trying to figure out a way to achieve a goal that can satisfy all the stakeholders, which is sometimes really challenging. But in order for these startups, especially to be, or really any tech companies to be successful, you have to be able to think broadly, like Anastasia was saying, with clinician input, regulatory input, reimbursement input, of course, patient input. And so just a shout out to
Absolutely.
AdvaMed and the resources they provide and the network they have built to try to bring those folks together.
Absolutely. AdvaMed is very beneficial for as small as startups to companies as large as Philips in just helping navigate this space, um, advocating for these companies on the Hill and regulatory. We have many work groups that would apply and allow for participation from the staff of our member companies to like, have further context and further educate themselves on these issues. Uh, and with that, I would like to transition our final question. If you could give one piece of advice to MedTech or life sciences companies looking to embrace AI, what would it be? I think we'll start with Wilson and then transition from there. Wilson, what do you think?
Biggest piece of advice would be to be just so ruthlessly customer obsessed and identifying how to bring them to the table to really not only work backwards to invent with them, but also invent on their behalf. Because what I see all too often are, folks from very different domains, experiences, and backgrounds thinking they can solve things on their own when it actually takes many stakeholders from very diverse backgrounds and different skill sets to really isolate the thing that they want to solve for and deliver value to customers. As I see this time and time again, where as you think about the build piece of it can't be done in isolation. The value creation of it is the broader picture that we need to solve for as an industry, particularly in emerging spaces like AI. So, that is front and center for how I, the type of feedback and advice that I give a lot of the startups that I work with.
Nice. Alyssa, would you like to take the next
Sure.
advice offering?
Sure. So first and foremost, I say go for it, right? Think big, think outside the box, be creative. We've all spoken so much today about the intersection and collaboration. Collaborate early, like earlier than you think you need to collaborate. And with that, my biggest piece of advice is to just really make sure that you're solving a problem that needs to be solved, that the problem you're solving actually fills an unmet need. And Wilson alluded to this in his answer as well. But it's so important to make sure that at the end of the day, you can answer that so what question with something really big. And it feeds back in, it solves all five of the quintuple aim even better. But you want to make sure that you have really thought through how it will translate so that it doesn't fall off and it actually makes it to the bedside.
Yeah, I was going to add something very similar. It's hard to go third on this question, but because I'm sure there are like 15 things that we can say, but the most important, I'd add the be crystal clear on the problem you're trying to solve, because you can very easily get swayed with the shiny things that look wonderful. So, what problem are you trying to solve? And what's the impact if you solve that problem? The so what factor, I always call it that, Alyssa. So I'm happy to hear someone else
Yeah.
also using that. So what problem are you trying to solve? So what if you solve it? What is the impact of it? You start there. Applying the technology is easy after you've solved that problem, right? I mean, with the right experts and the right partnerships, as we said, you can solve the problem. But if you don't have a problem well articulated, you're going to be spinning and spending money and time.
Well put. And even with you being last and repeating previous advice from our other two hosts, I think it's important that repetition is emphasized and that these things do get drilled in our audience's head, that these are all important factors to consider when going these ways and considering AI.